I think there will be at least one tax that will go up. I suspect it's going to be capital gains tax, sort of putting it on a par with income tax. And then I think you're right. And then I think many commentators, many journalists will be asking Secretary of State when they come on programmes, well, hang on a second, why didn't you just say this during the general election campaign?
Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is expected to reveal on Monday a shortfall in public finances of around £19 billion. Of course, this affects government spending on essential public services. It could pave the way for potential tax rises in the autumn budget. We spoke to the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, earlier on. He wouldn't be drawn on exactly what the implications would be. Labour sources said the blame lies with the previous Conservative government and describe it as a shocking inheritance. Those sources have accused Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor, of presiding over a black hole and still campaigning for tax cuts. Louise Ellman, the thing that kind of just confuses me over this is we were told by the Institute for Fiscal Studies during the election campaign that for both the Conservatives and Labour, there was a conspiracy of silence. They knew exactly what the financial situation was, but they weren't being honest with the electorate. Why?
Well, I think Labour were very clear that there was a massive problem there that would have to be tackled. I don't think there was any pretence that there wasn't, and I think the government perhaps wanted to cover it up. And Labour did then rule out certain specific things that they would do to try to deal with it. But I don't think it's any secret that there is a massive problem. And I think it's also true that until you're actually in government and actually see the books in detail, see what the assumptions are, see what's written in, see what's planned, you don't know the full extent of that. But clearly the fact there's a massive problem was pretty well known. I think it's something that was tackled in the election campaign. I think the public know that.
But they didn't. I mean, for example, the Labour Party, when they were running in the election, they were saying, we're going to rule out income tax rises, we're going to rule out VAT, national insurance and corporation tax. They kind of backed themselves into a corner. Those are the big tax raising, big revenue raisers there. They kind of back themselves slightly into a corner. They don't have that many options left to raise money, or we go back to austerity.
Well, going back to austerity was ruled out, and there was a point when Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, said that we don't have to make any tax increases to enact the programme that we're putting in front of you, which I think really left a bit unspoken what's going on behind all this, and that we won't really know that until we can look at the books in detail. But when the government's looking at dealing with finance, putting taxes up isn't the only thing they can do. There are ways of rephasing projects, looking at efficiencies, looking at doing things differently. But there may well be a need to raise money in some form as well. And we'll get the big picture next week. I don't think we can really be very surprised at what might be found.
Nikki, do you think it's fair that the new Labour government can come in and go, we didn't know it was this bad till we were in power?
Well, I think whether it's fair or not, it's part of an incoming government's playbook. And I think that one of the things that's going to be very interesting is that the new government clearly had the first, the whole of July mapped out, if you like. And this is very clearly a big part of their incoming strategy, which is to say everything's much worse, not just financially, but they're all across the departments. They've said this than we had expected. But the next big challenge for them is going to be, so what are you going to do about it? And I think Rachel Reeves is going to find that being outraged about what they found, apparently, is only going to last for a matter of weeks. And then they've got to come up with some answers. And as Louise says, there are other options. And one of the things, of course, is that governments could spend less and they can spend differently. And that would be a very insight into their priorities. But I think there will be at least one tax that will go up. I suspect it's going to be capital gains tax, sort of putting it on a par with income tax. And then I think you're right. And then I think many commentators, many journalists will be asking Secretary of State when they come on programmes, well, hang on a second, why didn't you just say this during the general election campaign?
What do you think, Louise, would be the most sensible thing to do? Would it be cuts to public services, or would it be tax rises, or borrow more?
I think they're going to have to look at a mixture of things depending on the exact nature of the problem that's found. And we all know it's likely that there is a big problem. And in previous times when governments have looked at financial issues, they've often rephased projects that were being planned, and don't cancel things, but do it differently. They may look at raising money in a different kind of way. And in that, there may well be a need to raise some money as well. But I don't think it will be in any of the specific areas that have been ruled out. But Nick is right in saying that once you're in government, you're responsible, and you can certainly point to the problems you inherit, and that has to be done. But I think that can only be done once.
Nikki, what do you think the solution would be?
Well, I mean, as I say, I think that probably they will end up looking at taxes, and one of the obvious ones would be capital gains tax, given everything else that they ruled out. And I suspect that probably over the next couple of months they'll be wondering why they did rule so much out during the election campaign. But I do think we're going to come on to talk about the CQC report in a moment. You can spend less, but you can also spend differently. And you can say that actually we're not going to spend on this thing because we're going to spend more on, another part of the public services. Or we're going to, this is why Rachel Reeves is talking so much about getting private investment in, for example, into major infrastructure spending. Because obviously if they're able to get more investment from the private sector, and the UK looks like a better bet for investment, then that obviously takes the pressure off some government departments and some government budgets. So look, that's why I think this first budget, we're expecting it, I think now in October, will be so fascinating. And then the spending review, which probably will come towards the end of the year, which sets out what government departments have to spend, and whether that's a 1-year spending review or whether that's several years. It is also going to show how clearly their intention is to change the way that the spending and what money is spent on, basically.
Let me read you this message, which has just come in from Mary. Instead of blaming Labour for claiming they didn't know just how bad the country's financial position is, some humility and regret from the Tory leadership candidates for wrecking our finances would be welcome. Do you think that's fair, Nikki?
Well, I think Tom Tugendhat used the word humility. I heard yesterday on your programme, and I certainly think it's right for those who want to lead the Conservative Party to show they understand about the defeat. What I would just say back to the person who texted in was that it was the Conservative government that spent billions on furlough, that kept people in work and kept businesses afloat at a very uncertain time for the country. And I don't think we should forget that. And that is part of the reason why public debt is so high.
Let's talk now about the front page of today's Times newspaper. Ministers have declared the NHS watchdog not fit for purpose. This is an interim review into the Care Quality Commission, finding some hospitals have not been inspected for up to a decade, putting patients' lives at risk. The Commission is responsible for regulating all hospitals, GPs and care homes in England, and one care home inspector claimed never to have actually met a person with dementia. Nikki, maybe we could start with you on this one. Really, is this about NHS resources, accountability, the associated organisations? What are your thoughts on this?
So I think, this is a review that was started in May, so just by the last government. And I listened to the Wes Streeting interview, and I think Wes is going to be a very good health secretary. I don't think, I think this is going to be partly about resources, but this is actually about an accountability mindset. And I remember many years ago when I was Education Secretary, having a conversation with Jeremy Hunt, then Health Secretary, and he wanted to create, at that point, a sort of Ofsted equivalent, basically. And I think, Ofsted, we've debated it, I'm sure, on this panel before. There are many challenges to Ofsted, many people who don't like it and everything else. But the one thing that is clear in education is that schools are accountable for their results, and they're accountable to parents and to pupils. And I think that accountability to patients is really missing in the NHS. And I think that CQC had a role in making sure that accountability mindset was fostered, and they have clearly failed to do it. And so I think there's a new interim chief executive. I welcome the report, but I think this is much more about, and I don't know, I suppose will come out, whether what CQC have found is real difficulties in inspecting hospitals and care settings. They haven't had the cooperation of those they're trying to inspect. And I was just listening to, I think you had somebody on before who was saying, these judgments of, good, outstanding, requires improvement, they're far too simplistic. Well, actually, they are designed for patients and for those of us making decisions about where our loved ones should go.
They're designed to be simple, aren't they? They're designed to be
They're designed to
clear.
be usable by people who are not medical experts. And so if people within the medical profession are pushing back and saying, oh, no, it's too simplistic, everything else, well, they are missing the point of what the CQC is there to do. But I think Wes is right. I mean, clearly this report showing the CQC has got a lot of work to do to improve the way it actually inspects so it can be relied upon.
Louise, what do you think?
Well, the Care Quality Commission was originally set up by Gordon Brown back in 2009, and this report is truly shocking. And it's about how institutions which are dealing with the public in a very vulnerable situation are actually performing. And clearly, the Commission is failing. I think, in a way, it's a symbol of a lot of collapse of public services looking back over the last decade. But it's absolutely vital that something is done. And it's about the way the Commission went about its work, and sometimes its lack of inspectors. But also there's a need to listen to what people working within the service are saying, within the care service, within hospitals, listen to whistleblowers a lot more closely than is happening now, to listen to people who are not just receiving care, they may be too vulnerable to even be able to say what's happening to them, but to their families, where there are families, to look at what's happening around them. I think it is a truly shocking indictment of what's been happening, and it needs radical treatment, and very quickly indeed.
You say radical treatment, Louise. Could this actually be the jolt that is needed, not just for the Care Quality Commission itself, but for care in this country to actually be looked at properly and fundamental reform to be implemented?
Yes, I think it is. And it is absolutely shocking how the care sector has been neglected, how provision of care is compartmentalised between different organisations, the health service, social services, the voluntary sector, no proper watchdog, no way can vulnerable individuals navigate their way around, anxious families don't quite know what to do, and people who really rely on these services don't have a voice. And in that circumstance, it is absolutely vital that there is a proper public watchdog that really knows what's going on and is really listening to people, often people working within the service who know what's wrong but need to be listened to before action can be taken.
Nicky Morgan, is there appetite, do you think, is there political will to get this fixed, and not just with the Care Quality Commission, as I say, but care in general? It has been such a neglected part of health and social care, because I remember someone very senior in the NHS saying to me a couple of years ago that the NHS is on its knees, but care has fallen over.
Yes, I mean, well, I certainly think, and I think social care was one of the great subjects that didn't feature in the recent election campaign at all. And for anybody who has tried to arrange care for a loved one, they will know just how difficult the system is, and really how the fight that has to happen to get that care, and even then it's usually tentative, and you know, you're worrying the whole time that the situation is going to change. Look, I'd like to think this would be a jolt, and I think the political will on all sides of the political divides is there. I think that Wes Streeting is, as I say, I think he's the right person to actually have these conversations and to lead it. But it's not just about the politicians, it's about the NHS and the care system itself, and the care system plus local government. Those are three big groupings that have to work together to get this working for the country. And I have to say, I'm yet to be convinced that they really want to change.
Louise, do you think, in light of what this interim report says, that it's not fit for purpose, that actually this watchdog should just be got rid of, the CQC should be got rid of, and just bring in a new one, start afresh?
I think that's a situation that Wes Streeting as a minister has to look at. Can this be reformed? Is it to do with the leadership there? Is it to do with the way the Commission went about its job? Is it its structure? I think that has to be in his hands to look at. What's absolutely essential is that the system actually operates effectively, and it can only do that by listening to people. And if a system thinks it can work simply by someone outside coming in, not listening to the people who are affected, it is bound to fail.